a betrayal, a 20-year silence, and perhaps one of the hardest questions that Jesus ever asked of us. And that's what's on tap for today's Bible study, and we're kicking it off with a short story. It had been 20 years, a lifetime since that night she packed a bag with shaking hands. The acrid smell of burnt plastic still clinging to her clothes. Alara was 38 now, a woman who lived a quiet life. She organized other people's histories because she had incinerated her own. The egregious act, as she'd come to call it in the sterile confines of her mind, was a sin that hadn't faded. It remained in her brain in HD, her sister Maeve, 17 and luminous, her violin tucked under her chin. Maeve was a child prodigy, the golden child of the family, destined for Juilliard. The audition tape, recorded on a cumbersome VHS camcorder, was her golden ticket in. Her audition was perfect. A flawless, soaring rendition of a Bach partita that made even her stoic German father weep. And Alara, 16 at the time and suffocating in her sister's shadow. And Alara had taken the tape. She hadn't just hidden it. In a fit of jealousy, she had taken the tape to the backyard fire pit. She snipped the magnetic ribbon and watched the ribbon curl and melt into a foul-smelling black lump as the VHS cassette burned in fire. She told Maeve that the VCR must have just eaten it. The lie was clumsy, it was pathetic, and while Maeve, in her frantic despair, had no time to dissect the lie, the deadline passed. And Maeve's dream of getting into Juilliard and being a concert violinist, it burned, just like that tape in the fire pit. The guilt was a physical thing for Alara, like a stone in her gut. A week later, with $200 she had stolen from her father's wallet, Alara was on a bus heading west. She left only a note that said, "I'm sorry." They would never know what for. We heard about the betrayal and the 20-year silence. Now let's dig into this hard question that Jesus would ultimately ask of us all. And to do that, we're going to fire up the desktop. We're going to bring up Logos Bible software. And we are going to start out just a little bit differently. We're going to detour for a little bit. We're going to look at a passage that you're going to think is completely unrelated, but you're going to see in a bit how it is going to wholly tie in to our study for the day and for the question for today. So let's do that. Let's go on over here to the desktop. I have got my desktop fired up. What do you think of this picture, by the way? Some of you have seen this before. If you see my social media, it's a picture of the Holmain Barn, which is not far here from Comfrey. And I took this about a month ago. Oh, maybe 2 months ago. I don't remember. I'm getting old. With the Milky Way in the backdrop. And people are just loving this photo. It's currently hanging up in the Springfield Gallery and the Springfield Library in the gallery at an art show contest that's happening up there. If you're local, go on up there and check out all the artwork. It is so cool. I am just in awe of all the art that's up there. It makes my stuff look like child's play comparatively. Anyway, enough about art. Let's bring up Logos Bible software. And here we go. Bada boom. And we hear from Genesis chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all of the host with them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because God had rested from all of his work that he had done in creation. You're seeing a word that's being repeated there a few times, and it's the number 7. And you're going to say, what is the number 7? What does this passage have to do with anything? Whew, right? It's interesting that this number 7, it actually appears over 700 times in the whole of the Bible. And in biblical Judaism, some places even within Christendom, numbers can be really significant. We actually see that throughout the whole of the Bible. And the number 7 in biblical numerology symbolizes completion. It symbolizes perfection, wholeness, holiness, rest. And these are notions that I want you to hold on to. Again, holiness, perfection, completion, and rest. Hold on to these notions as we continue to read on and go through our study, as we dig into this question that Jesus would ask of us. And in order to get to that question, we gotta hear a question that was first asked of Jesus that he then responded to. We're gonna first look at the question that was asked of Jesus. And I bet you some of you are just going, oh, I already know what this question is. We're going to look at that question, and then we're going to see how Jesus responded. And within that response, we're going to pull out from that text the question that hard question that Jesus asks of us all. And we're going to interact with it. And in a bit, we're going to go back to the story of Alara and Maeve and see how this all flushes out too. Here we go. Let's pull up Logos again. And let's now go to Matthew chapter 18. We're going to look at verses 22 through 35. Let me bring it up here. Bing, bang. Boom. Here we go. Here's the question. The question that was asked of Jesus. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sinned against me? 7 times? Man, that is a great question, isn't it? We've all been offended. We've all been wronged by a friend, by a parent, by a spouse, by a child, by a brother or sister in church, by somebody in the community, whomever, right? We've been wronged all before. And sometimes those offenses are really shallow and we just completely go, let it go, right? You forgive them instantly. And then there are times when people are really, truly wronged in ways that, quite honestly, I can't even fathom and imagine. And to forgive might seem like an extremely hard thing. And so Peter's asking a question, Lord, do I got to forgive somebody 7 times? Now remember what he's asking here. Peter was fully aware of biblical numerology. He was fully aware of what the number 7 meant, especially as you go back to Genesis, that it means to forgive completely, to forgive somebody as though you're giving them rest, to forgive as though that you're making them whole again. It's like perfect, complete forgiveness. Let's see how Jesus responded. I bet you already know the answer, right? Jesus said, no, not 7 times, Peter, but 70 times 7. Whoa, right? Jesus has taken Peter's response and he is completely amping it up massively. Before we get to the kit and caboodle of our question, let's finish reading this passage, right? Because we really got to get at the heart of it. How much do we got to forgive somebody? What's that really look like? And how do we flush that out, right? To do that, Jesus told a story. Let's finish reading that, and then we'll go back and we'll chat about this a little bit more. Picking up in verse 23, we hear, therefore the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. And in the process, one of his debtors who was brought in owed him millions of dollars. He couldn't pay, so his master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife, his children, and everything owned, to pay the debt. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me, and I will pay it all. Every penny, the guy is saying. Then his master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. I wish the federal government would forgive my student loan debt like that. Don't we all wish like that? If you own a farm, like the bank would forgive your farm debt. Anyway, here we go. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Be patient with me and I will pay it all back, he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until he could pay the debt in full. Ooh, harsh but. When some of the other servants saw this, they were extremely upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called in the man he had forgiven and said, "You servant, you evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me." And here's the question right here, my friends, my brothers and sisters. Jesus asks of you and me, shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. We'll get to that one at the end. Because Jesus said, that's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. You think about Jesus's response, right? That would have been absolute jaw dropper when Peter heard that. It would have been another mic drop moment. We heard last week about a mic drop moment. This was maybe even bigger. If we were to take Jesus literally, it's like he was saying, no, Peter, you're not going to forgive 7 times. You're going to forgive 490 times, Peter. Not 489 because, that's fallen a little bit short. And, you don't need to overdo it and go 491, but exactly 490 times, Peter. Note my sarcasm. Jesus is getting at a much deeper truth, and I think you know that. Again, think of the number 7, right? Peter understood what that number 7 meant, and Jesus is saying, Peter, yeah, you've got to forgive completely. It's got to be whole. You've got to make that person whole again. You've got to give them rest. But what Jesus is saying there is it's completely taking it to a higher level. He's saying it's as though we've got to forget the sin ever happened in the first place. Think about that. There's scripture passages that allude to that. We hear those in the Old Testament. What they are off the top of my head, I can't tell you. Maybe as I'm editing the video, I'll just put some references on the bottom or flash them across the screen. But God doesn't just forgive us. God completely forgets that the sins ever happened in the first place. No matter how egregious it is, if you ask God to forgive you, he wipes that sin away. He casts it away. He burns it in that fire pit, so to speak, just as Alair had taken that VHS tape, cut it up, and burned that tape in the fire pit where it smoldered with black smoke. It's as though God is taking those sins of yours and mine and cutting them up like a magnetic ribbon and throwing them in that fire tape where they smolder and burn, and they are completely incinerated with not even a speck of ash remaining. They are completely incinerated. That's what Jesus was getting at. That we got to forgive someone that much, that we have to have that much mercy because God has had that much mercy on you and I. That can be a hard thing. It can be an extremely hard thing. I'd encourage you at some other time when we're not on camera together, or at least put a pause together, to go back to this passage, to look at this passage from Matthew chapter 18 and see if you can find some words that stand out to you that would tie in with this form of pure and complete forgiveness. One word that I found that ties in with it is the word patience. That God is patient with us, almost to the nth degree that we can't even imagine, with the numbers that's so big that it's unfathomable, it's unimaginable. We hear this out of 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9. The Lord really isn't slow about his promises, as some people think. No, he's patient for your sake. He doesn't want anyone to be destroyed, but wants everyone to repent. In other words, Jesus is saying here through the Apostle Peter, the Holy Spirit speaking through Peter, is telling us that God doesn't want anybody to be cast away from him in an eternal sense. Not one soul on earth. God is giving every soul on this earth as much time as needed to come to a saving grace in faith through Jesus Christ. That God is that patient for us, that he gives us so many chances to hear the gospel and to respond to it. Many ultimately won't and don't. But what about those who hear over and over and over and over and over again, and they just won't hear, they won't listen, and they refuse to listen? What is God to do with them? God is merciful. We got to come to him and we got to ask his forgiveness. And we hear that in this parable that Jesus is asking. Now, that begs a question that I didn't think about actually earlier on Sunday morning as we were doing this Bible study, but I will pose it now. Even if somebody doesn't come to you and ask for your forgiveness, should you still forgive them anyway? Let me know in the comments down below what you think about that question. Should we forgive somebody if they have not come to us and asked for forgiveness? I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to leave it hanging there. I'm so nice, aren't I? When we go back to the Jesus' question that he asked us, shouldn't you have mercy on those who've offended you and those who've wronged you because God has had mercy on you? The obvious answer that Jesus was looking for here was affirmatively, astounding, and absolutely yes. He was saying that we have got to forgive other people as though that sin never even happened in the first place. As though that there's no memory of it whatsoever. Because again, that's what God did for us when we asked him to forgive us. Let's go back to our story of Alara and Maeve and to see how that played out. She'd followed her family from a distance, though through the sanitized lens of social media. Alara knew Maeve had gone to a state college to become a music teacher at their old high school. She married a kind-looking man named Ben, and she and Ben had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And in every photo, Maeve's smile was there. But Alara always searched her eyes, looking for the ghost of that stolen fire. The impetus for change arrived not as a dramatic thunderclap, but as a quiet, terrifying email from her aunt. Subject, your mother. Alara, I don't know if you'll ever get this. Your mom is sick. It's her heart. The doctors are saying it's a matter of weeks. Maybe. Maeve is taking it hard. She shouldn't have to do this alone. It's time to come home. The words blurred. It's time. 2 decades of running, and the finish line was the one place she could never go. The dread she lived with daily intensified, becoming like a suffocating panic within her. Facing her family was one thing. Facing her mother on her deathbed, that was another. But facing Maeve, that was the true horror. The flight to their small Ohio town was a journey through a tunnel of nauseating fear. What would she say? How could she possibly begin to explain the monstrousness of what she had done? The girl who had burned that tape was a stranger to her now, a phantom of that teenage rage and insecurity. She was still responsible for her crimes. Alara rented a car at the airport and drove past familiar landmarks that now seemed alien and accusatory. The park where they played, the ice cream shop, the high school where Maeve now taught children how to hold a bow. She found Maeve not at the hospital, but at their childhood home door. The door was unlocked. Alara pushed it open, her heart hammering against her ribs. The house smelled the same, of lemon polish and of their mother's rosewater perfume. Maeve was in the living room, sorting through a box of old photographs. She looked up, and for a moment, her face was a blank slate of confusion. Then recognition dawned, and it was followed not by rage, but by an exhaustion so profound it seemed to age her 10 years in a second. Alara, she said. Her voice was lower than Alara remembered, raspy with fatigue and unashed tears. Maeve, Alara whispered, the name feeling foreign and sacred on her tongue. An ocean of silence stretched between them, filled with 20 years of unspoken words, of anger and abandonment. Mom's sleeping, Maeve said. She asks for you. Alara flinched. I don't know how to. To what? Pick up the phone? Write a letter? Maeve's voice was brittle. We thought you were dead, Alara. For years we thought you were dead. It might have been better if I was, Alara said, the confession tasting like ash. Maeve stood up, her eyes the same deep blue as Alara's, finally showing a spark of the old fire. Don't you dare say that. Don't you have any idea what you did to us? To Dad? He never stopped looking for you. He died looking for you, Alara. The news hit Alara like a physical blow to the gut. She stumbled back, gripping the door frame. Dad? When? 5 years ago, heart attack. Maeve's voice broke. He just gave up. The stone of guilt in Alara's stomach became a black hole, consuming everything. This was so much worse than a stolen dream. This was life. Maeve, I have to tell you something. Alara choked back the tears, finally streaming down her face. The night I left, the audition tape. Maeve just stared at her, expression unreasonable. It wasn't the VCR. Alara sobbed, the words tumbling out of her torrent of a long overdue truth. I took it, and I burned it. I was so jealous I couldn't breathe. I hated you I hated that you had this light and I was just me. It was a monstrous thing to do, and it's the reason I ran. I couldn't live with you knowing what I'd done. She finished, gasping for breath, prepared for screaming, for violence, for anything. Instead, Maeve sank back into the couch, a single silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. She was quiet for a long time, looking at a photo in her hand. The two of them as children, gaff-toothed and grinning. I knew, Maeve whispered, her voice barely audible. I knew it was you. Her eyes weren't full of hate. They were filled with a sorrow so deep it was terrifying. I never said anything. I think part of me hoped it was wrong. It was easier to believe the tape was gone than to believe my own sister could hate me that much. She finally looked directly at Alara. Alara, you didn't just burn a tape. You burned us. You burned everything. The words were a final, devastating judgment. There was no absolution here. No easy forgiveness. Just the cold, hard wreckage of their lives. I get a little choked up at this story that, believe it or not, that Google AI and I created together. I didn't write this completely on my own. I gave AI a prompt and said, please write it for me. And there we go. I used this last Sunday for our sermon. It was a retelling of the story of Jacob and Essau, just from a modern context. Instead of making it about two brothers, I asked Google to make it about two sisters, and it knew exactly what I was asking for. And it wrote this gut-wrenching story. But, you know, this story could almost be true to life. You know, it's completely fictional, at least as far as what was written goes, this short story of these two characters, of these two sisters, of Alara and Maeve. But it could be real. How many family relationships have been burned for sins such as these, or like these, or maybe worse, or even not even as bad, where people just get filled with so much hatred that they refuse to forgive? I know people who are so angry at a sibling that they will not forgive them for things far less egregious than this. We go back to what Jesus said. If you don't forgive, what's going to happen to you? I mean, think about why mercy is so important to God. it's important to him because, number one, he has mercy on us. That answer is obvious, but God doesn't want us to live with that kind of hatred on our heart. He doesn't want us to live with that blackness, that dark, smoldering, noxious poison in our heart. Like, you think of a VCR tape, for those of you who are my age or older, that you know what a VCR tape was, right? And if you were to cut up that ribbon, if you were to rip it completely out and you were to throw it into a fire, it would smoke. It's made out of petroleum, right? It's not going to just burn like paper. It's going to burn noxiously, and create a lot of black smoke. It's going to put out a really putrid smell, and God doesn't want us to have that living within us, metaphorically, spiritually speaking. If we are not forgiving someone, it's as though that smoldering VCR tape is lingering within our hearts. It's creating a black, smoldering, melting, putrid poison within us. That's what happens when we don't forgive other people, and we have to live with that. And God doesn't want us to live with that. God doesn't want you to live with that. And that's why forgiveness is such a powerful thing, because not only are we giving that other person rest, complete and perfect rest, right? Going back to that number 7, we're giving ourselves rest as well. It's as though that a 1 billion-ton weight has been removed from our heart. Imagine the story of Alara and Maeve. It was probably harder for Alara to forgive herself than for Maeve to forgive her sister. And that's often true of real life, isn't it? If you can relate, type down in the comments section below, I can relate. Harder to forgive myself. We go back to that question. Will God forgive those who don't ever ask for his forgiveness? It's actually not a question that's answered in the Bible. We don't know the depths of God's mercy and God's grace and God's forgiveness. But we do know that hell is a real place. We look at what Jesus said. He said the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. That opens up a can of worms all into itself, one that we can't answer. He said, that's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. If we don't forgive completely and wholly, as hard as it might seem to be, holistically is what I meant to say, then what should God do to us? Well, Jesus gives us the answer. I don't want that to happen to you. I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want that to happen to anybody. Here's the reality, my brothers and sisters. If you're holding on to some offense that somebody created against you, or you think that they created against you, whether they know it or not, you got to let it go. You've got to forgive. That bitterness, that rage, that anger that you have within you, if you have any there, it's eating you alive, and you know it is. So what do? Here's the practical thing. You ask God to help you let it go. You ask God to help you forgive. You search your heart and you say, God, you've forgiven me. Please help me forgive other people. I think of that movie Shrek, and a conversation that Shrek and Donkey had, where Shrek said that ogres are like onions. They got a lot of layers. Well, forgiveness can be the same way. Sometimes there's a lot of layers to our hearts. And sometimes we got to forgive people like peeling an onion. A little bit here and a little bit there, but eventually you get all the way down to its core. And it's easy to completely let it go, to throw it away. We don't know exactly how the story of Maeve and Alara ends. That was the beginning. It might seem like the end, but it was actually the beginning. It was the beginning to the end. How do you think the story ended? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope you've enjoyed this Bible study as much as I have enjoyed creating it for you today. I thank you for joining me today for this Bible study. If you liked what you've heard today, please give the video a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It really does help out the algorithm if you like the video. If you comment down below, it helps it grow, it helps it spread, and we can get it out to more people. If you liked what you heard, come back again next week. And we'll look at another question that Jesus asked us. Maybe it won't be quite so hard. I'll see you again next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. Be blessed. Until then, my brothers and sisters, goodbye.